Welcome again. My name is Jamie Koo, and I'm on the parent engagement team. Welcome to our last day of Enriching the Learning Experience, Vision for 2020 and beyond. I'm going to go ahead and give a few announcements today to make sure that you have a pleasant experience while you're here with us. This is Claudia Aguilera. She's also on the parent engagement team, and she will be presenting the Spanish interpretation for those of our friends who need interpretation. Please follow the icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen and find the interpretation icon and select your preferred language. Just a couple of reminders, we are going to be recording the keynote and workshop sessions. After this event is over, it will be uploaded to our parent engagement event resources website. A couple reminders about etiquette. We will be muting everyone to eliminate background noise. And every now and then, we'll probably invite you to interact with us through the chat. If that's the case, go ahead and scroll down to the bottom of your Zoom bar and click on chat so a new box can come up for you and you can enter in your comments. This is really important for the facilitation of our workshops today. In your Zoom bar or on your screen where you find the little icon with your picture, you need to rename yourself in Zoom. So if you're on your computer today, please go down to the bottom of your Zoom bar and select on participants, or scroll over your picture icon and find the box with the 3 dots. From there, you can click on the box that says rename and rename yourself in Zoom. Rename yourself as WS, which stands for workshop, and put the number of your workshop. You received an event confirmation with your workshop number, and then enter in your first initial and your last name. So for example, I would rename myself as WS3-JQ if I want to transfer to the 3rd workshop during the workshop time. If you're logging in from your phone today, follow this very similar instructions. Just go down to the bottom of your phone and find the participants icon. When you press on that, you'll find a couple of arrows on the right-hand side. And from those arrows, you can rename yourself in the new screen. Again, same thing, put WS for workshop, enter in the number of your workshop, and then your first initial and last name. And if you are unable to rename yourself in Zoom, please enter into the chat your workshop number and your name, and we'll try to catch you that way. I'm going to turn the time now to Don Ying from our 6th District PTA for a quick announcement.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dawn Ying. I'm the Executive Vice President of 6th District PTA. We oversee PTAs in Santa Clara County, as well as San Benito County and Monterey County. And I'm very pleased today to introduce Dr. Mary Dewan, Santa Clara County Superintendent of Schools. Dr. Mary Ann Dewan is Santa Clara County's transformational leader who models inclusion, equity, innovation, and partnership through her courage, kindness, and gratitude. She truly shows us that we are stronger together. Thank you for all you do for our students, our families, and our community, Dr. Dewan.
Thank you so much, Don. We so value our partnership with 6th District PTA and are so grateful to all of the parents and leaders in the 6th District PTA who make so much of our work possible as well. I'm really honored to be with all of you this morning to welcome you. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Santa Clara County Office of Education Family Engagement Symposium. Today, this year's events are entitled Enriching the Learning Experience, Vision for 2020 and Beyond. And I am Dr. Mary Ann Dewan, your Santa Clara County Superintendent of Schools. Today's lineup is super exciting. We're offering a number of dynamic speakers and workshops. And to highlight just a few, we have Reading Without Walls with the 2016 National Ambassador for Young People's Literature and graphic novelist, Jane Lin Yang, with his team from Graphic Campus. Also, we'll have a parent's guide to talking about racism by the Santa Clara County Alliance of Black Educators. We'll be joined by Leon Beachman. And leveraging partnerships for student and family success, featuring community organizations, Sunday Friends, and the Party program. Now it is my pleasure to welcome our keynote speaker. Ruby Ibarra was born in the Philippines and spent the first 4 years of her life in Tacloban City before her family eventually settled in San Lorenzo, California. As a teenager, Ruby began crafting her own rhymes until she began to develop her own style and became comfortable with sharing her story. Currently, she's a scientist at a Bay Area biotech company working in the quality control department on COVID-19 test kits, and yes, even a vaccine. Ruby is also an up-and-coming hip-hop artist performing sold-out shows with her band of 8, the Balik Bayans. Her keynote today is titled, Speak Your Truth, Who Am I? And her workshop is the Spoken Word Writing Workshop. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Ibarra. It is an honor to have you here today as our guest speaker.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Mary Ann, for that beautiful introduction. I just wanted to say good morning and how is everyone doing? I hope that we're all fully wide awake. I know it's a little bit early on a Saturday morning, even for myself, but thank you so much for joining us on this morning. And I'd like to first express my gratitude and appreciation to Jamie and the Santa Clara County Office of Education for inviting me today. I'm grateful to you all for allowing me the opportunity to speak. So thank you so much. If you can please move forward with the next slide. So first, I want to start by saying that the most important thing that we own and that we have for ourselves is our identity. It's ultimately your self-worth and how you see yourself. Your identity is how you present yourself to the world, but also how you reauthor your past and how you claim and define your present. So if we can move over to the next slide. So what makes your identity? I'd like to open up the floor a little bit if that's allowed. If anybody has any ideas on what kind of things make up your identity, I'd love to, whether it's through the chat or if anybody just wants to chime in, I'd love to hear people's thoughts. What makes our identity? Anyone have any idea? So somebody in the chat said family. That's correct. Tradition. Language, yes. Ethnicity, your creativity, your roots, your gender, sexuality, where you're from, your work, and your culture. Those are very, very great answers in your experience as well. So can we move over to the next slide? Yes, and your personality as well. So that's exactly right, what everybody's been sharing. Of course, your identity includes everything that people have shared. And that, of course, includes your language, your appearance, your culture, your beliefs, and your community. And if we can proceed to the next slide as well. And so for our social identity, I think it's broken down into 3 main parts. You know, your core identity includes your behaviors, your values, and the things that you believe in. And your chosen identity includes your skills, your hobbies, and where you live. All things that people have mentioned in the chat. And last, your given identity includes your age, your place of birth, and parts of your physical appearance. I think that a lot of these things we shape with our experiences, and we also evolve as we get older and we become comfortable with who we are. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about my identity and who I am. So for those of you who have never heard of me before, my name is Ruby Ibarra. I am a Bay Area native. I grew up here in the East Bay, actually in Hayward, in a small town called San Lorenzo as I got older. I'm a rapper, I'm a songwriter, I'm a director, and a spoken word poet. Much of my poetry, my music, and my work center on my identity as a woman, especially as a Filipino American, and my experiences as an immigrant. I released a debut album called Circa 91 in 2017, and that was mine and my parents' story in trying to find a place called home. I'm also the daughter of 2 working class immigrants, and my sister and I were raised by our mother. Education, specifically higher education, has always been part of my life. A majority of people don't know, but I'm also a scientist where I work full time when I'm not performing or writing music. And for me growing up, applying for college was a bit challenging because my mom was overwhelmed by the applications. And as far as I could remember, I would always be the translator and always the one to help my mom with completing forms ever since I was about 8 years old. To me, she was perfectly capable of communicating in English, but I didn't understand as a kid, and even until early into my adulthood, that her hesitation and often insecurities with language were the result of structures deeply rooted in classism and racism. Additionally, the pressures of assimilating to US culture made my mom feel alienated, much so that she believed that her immigrant voice was inferior. So, my mom was completely unfamiliar with the college application process, and I never really recalled her suggesting colleges to attend. I just knew that she wanted me to enroll and to eventually get a degree. And so my mom would frequently tell me that a degree was my only way to ensure that I'd have a life better than hers. This American degree was a prized possession in her eyes, not like hers, which came from the Philippines. You see, degrees from the Philippines don't often translate equally here in America. My mom was the youngest of 7 brothers and was the first to get a college degree in her household. She ended up getting a bachelor's in accounting and soon after helped put her own brothers through school. When we immigrated to America, the first and only job that my mom was able to get after months of applying was as a janitor working minimum wage at a fast food restaurant. As for my father, he was a teacher in the Philippines who ended up working for a manufacturing company in the Bay Area, often coming home with welts and scars on his hands as he would help produce boxes. For me, I was very fortunate enough to be accepted into the University of California, Davis, where I studied biochemistry. I've loved science since I was a kid, but I never felt completely engaged in school. I felt like most of my time at school was spent to get through the day, just so I can go home and rap and listen to all my favorite artists and quickly getting back to writing a verse in the back of class. To me, school was always my backup plan. My backup if music didn't become a viable career option. I remember I would always be so disinterested in a lot of my classes, especially when it came to history class, because history was the first time I ever got a C in high school. And I remember being so upset with myself and thinking that I didn't want to learn about people in history who had nothing to do with me. I felt like the history that I was reading in these books were erasure of my own experiences and the people that I saw as familiar and who looked like me. I didn't understand why I had to memorize facts that didn't include my history. Now, fast forward to my freshman year of college, I took this class called Ethnic Studies. I remember I was sitting in my dorm room and I opened up a book that changed the course of my life forever. And if we can move forward to the next slide. I remember sitting there at my desk into the late hours of the night, my freshman year of college, completely captivated and thinking that for the first time in my life, I saw myself and my family in a piece of literature. I read something that felt so familiar and saw words that reminded me of the texture of my cousins and my grandma's voices. This book is what's presented on the slide, as you all see, and it is a book called America is in the Heart by this author named Carlos Bulusan. And it was a required reading for my Asian American Studies class that semester. It was the first time I felt the impact of representation and visibility. Now, I have always been a bookworm ever since I was a little kid. And unfortunately, as I grew older, we start to gain interest in other things. And for me, music was one of those things. And so my love for books, I've kind of got separated from being able to consume books as I used to when I was a little kid. And so when I got to, taking this class in college, it was the first time where I actually sat down and I read a book from the first page, and I didn't put it down until I got to the very last page. And so looking back at it now, it was in school, within these classrooms and textbooks, that gave me the introduction and push to start finding myself. It took me 18 years to finally find ethnic studies and to realize that our stories are a part of history and that there is power in seeing ourselves. A quote from this book from Carlos Bulusan that has stayed with me until today is, "I cried, recalling all the years that had come and gone, but my remembrance gave me a strong courage and the vision of a better life. Yes, I will be your writer and make all of you live again in my words," I sobbed. That was the moment that empowered me to become a poet and a rapper. I realized that I could have a career while keeping my creativity. I also realized that whatever my career would be, it would need purpose and it would need to make me see my full potential. And so now I ask, who is allowed to speak? Who is allowed to have a voice? Whose voice do we deem as the standard or the normal perspective? And what stories do we consider to be worth telling? Growing up, it was always my understanding from a lot of my classes and a lot of the media that I consumed that those voices that were normalized in those books that I read and the stories that I saw in the movies were the voices that should be heard. And even in school, I felt voiceless. Now, there's going to be moments of uncertainty. There's been so many times where I felt that at the very last minute, I wanted to back out because I believed I wasn't good enough. I felt like I didn't have the look or the sound that would be appreciated. And I was ultimately afraid to fail. There's always going to be moments of sacrifice and times where you're forced to examine yourself and evaluate what's important. But I'm here to tell every single one of you to never compromise. Always keep your integrity, always. And just like the journey we've experienced this year in 2020, it's not always going to go as planned, and that's okay. Sometimes things change temporarily or even permanently. Sometimes you won't be able to precisely map everything out, and that's also okay. Sometimes you won't be productive or you won't be on the same trajectory as your peers, and that's okay as well. When I finished school, I thought that I'd have everything figured out, but I honestly didn't, and I still don't. You can plan all you want, and for most of you, like myself, it's not gonna go how you imagined. But we have to break barriers and enter spaces that our communities aren't historically part of, because everyone's voice is important. And if you can move on to the next slide. And so now I ask, why is it important to speak your truth? Why is it important to tell your story? I want to share that number one for me is that representation matters. Your voice is a catalyst for someone out there who looks just like you. Just like the book that I read and that I shared earlier, once I read America's in the Heart, I felt seen. I felt validated. I finally felt comfortable to be me. And 2, we need to own our stories. For a long time, I felt like I didn't own my story and that I had to be someone else just to please others. I used to even be embarrassed about my accent, but I failed to realize that trying to remove my accent was erasing my identity and erasing my voice. And my final point is 3, your voice has the power to influence. It's important to know where you're from in order to know where you're going. No one is going to write your story except you. And your story is your voice and also your experience. And of course, every person here has a unique and important story to tell. When I became a writer and a poet, I spoke my truth and I found my voice through sharing my identity. And through that, I regained my identity through finding my voice. Now, I also want to make a clear distinction here. When I say to use your voice, I don't necessarily mean it in the literal sense. I'm saying that you're telling your truth. You're being unapologetic in whatever platform you use to share your story. Whether you're a writer, an artist, an athlete, a photographer, a researcher, creative, and so on. And since we're here today, what does it mean for all of us to be in school? What does it mean to have gone to school? For me, it meant being a Filipino American who had access to spaces that my immigrant parents did not. And so what privileges and responsibilities come with that? What do you do with everything you're learning? Your experience in school is not just about learning facts or even learning skills. It does not and should not end there. For me, education is about being a resource, spreading that knowledge, especially giving back to our very own communities that raised and nurtured us. So be unapologetic, be fearless, be loud, and with your voices, carry our communities with it. And let's move with impact. Let's build with intent. Let's create platforms and let's be present as resources for the next generation of young academics. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
So Ruby, do you have time for some Q&A?
Of course, I would love to do that.
Is there anybody from the audience who might have a question for Ruby? You can either drop it in the chat or unmute yourself and just say hi and ask your question.
This is Leon Beachman, Ruby, and thank you for your presentation. And I had an opportunity to go online and catch a few of your videos. And so I appreciate the work that you've done and the creativity and all. And so I'm not sure if we have an ability to see any of your videos now, but I thought that they were well done, and thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you for checking out the videos. And for, I'm not sure if we're able to share it today as well, but for those of you who would like to check it out after today's presentations and workshops, they are available on YouTube.
We have a question. What was one of your greatest challenges and how did you overcome it?
That's a great question. There's definitely a lot of challenges. The first thing that comes to mind are the personal challenges. And I think that I want to share this because I think that we all can relate to it, given that we're all in this pandemic here in 2020, as all of our lives have really been impacted and shifted. As I shared earlier, I am a performing artist. I perform with my band. And for the last 2 years, I've been on tour doing live shows and concerts. And so this year has really greatly affected that. I think we've all been affected across the board, professionally and personally. And for me, I just saw all of the performances that I was supposed to do this year all canceled at the beginning of quarantine. And I think I want to share that because I know that it's not just performers who've been impacted. As we all have seen, even schools, being closed down, and all of us not being able to see our friends, and having to quarantine and stay inside. And I share that by saying that it's important for us to really learn how to adjust and how to pivot and how to learn how to move with the times. I think that all of us are learning and evolving through this year together. And for me, I've learned how to kind of take a step back and realize, especially as an artist, that sometimes it's important for us to think about the bigger picture, to think about the community as a whole. I know that I shared that I was impacted by not being able to, have these human interactions anymore and being able to perform on stage. And at the end of the day, what I came to realize was that it's not just me that was affected, it's all of us. And I think that it's important for us to be cognizant about the people that are around us, and to, again, think about the community as a whole. And ultimately, what I learned from all of this is that, there's things greater than us sometimes. And also, it's okay to not be productive all the time. Sometimes it's important to take care of ourselves and to take care of the people in our community. And especially in times like this, to just check in with one another.
Ruby, we have a small group of students from Rancho Middle School in Milpitas. They've submitted some questions ahead of time, and I see that one of them has entered their question in the chat, but I wonder if that student would like to actually say hi and unmute yourself and ask your question in person. Maybe they're a little. Yes. Hi, Roger.
Hey, yeah, I'm Roger Mupas. They're actually my students that are there. And I have one question actually from a student who couldn't be there. And she wanted to ask Ms. Ibarra if being a scientist, because most of my students are very, they're really, when we read up, they're so impressed that you could be a scientist by day and, rapping by night. And my particular one student, she asked, does your work as being a scientist, does it influence your lyrics at all in any of your rap songs?
I think ultimately it does. So with science, it's definitely a very technical type of field. There's a lot of memorization and application that's involved. And I think because of my studies with science, specifically when it comes to chemistry and biology, I think the way that I approach music has been kind of similar, where my mindset is a lot more organized, and it's a little bit more technical. Even the way that I write my lyrics, I like to infuse it with some scientific references sometimes. And then I think just the way that I approach, whether it is how I do my live shows or how I write my lyrics, it's very specific, it's very technical, and it's very particular. And I think those are all skills that, I attribute to having learned from taking courses such as chemistry and biology.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roger.
You're welcome. And to my students, come on, man. We talked about this. All right.
Come on, don't be shy, especially if you're going to be part of my workshop later. It's going to be interactive.
That's my question.
And Jamie, there's a few questions in the
That's my question.
I hear a student talking. Let me see. Can you speak up a little bit?
Mr. Mupas took my question.
Oh, oops. I guess I read the wrong one. Oh, man. All right. There's others. There's like 3 more of you out there. All right.
Can I go?
Yes, please.
Oh,
Yes,
Brianna.
go for it.
is it hard for you to transition from being a COVID-19 researcher in the day and a rapper by night?
Sometimes it is a bit challenging, kind of like having to, flip the switch per se. When it comes to work, there's definitely a certain, you know, code of conduct or behavior. Obviously, I'm not at work rapping while I'm in the laboratory. And then so when I get home, I kind of have to switch to that part of my brain and think more as a creative and as a writer. I think when it comes to, like, again, although that I find the similarities or I attribute, what I've learned in science, and I try to apply it in my music career, there's still two, I think, very different platforms. And one side of my brain is very technical and the other side is a little bit more creative. And so when I do come home at the end of the day after having worked in the lab, and then I do these virtual performances, I think I do tap into a different part of my brain, and I get to be a little bit more creative. And I think that there's beauty in that for us who have different interests. And I hope that sharing that will inspire others to realize that you don't have to be a specific thing. You don't have to have a specific career or a specific interest. It's sometimes it is fine for us to have multiple interests and to explore and to experiment with different things. And for me, that was both music and science, two things that I loved. And I never felt like I had to compromise and choose between one or the other. I think it's okay for us to have multiple interests. So thank you for your question.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
What inspired you to be a rapper and a scientist?
That's a great question. To be a scientist, for me, I was, like I mentioned in my keynote earlier, I was such a big bookworm. I loved, just reading novels, but also I was just a very curious kid growing up. I gravitated towards science because I felt like this was a subject that pretty much explained how the world works. And growing up, I always wondered, like, why are things the way they are? Why do things behave this way? How come when I do this is the result from that action? And these are things that were explained through chemistry and physics. And it was the application for me that really got my interest in wanting to find out more. And when it came to rapping, I grew up listening to artists like Tupac and Lauryn Hill. And for them, I felt like they told stories that were similar to the people that I knew in my community. And as much as I loved, my classes and my teachers and education growing up, I felt like sometimes my real teachers were the people that I grew up listening to, like the artists and these songs. And those lyrics were things that I could recite in verbatim, that I could say from beginning to end. And it would be very hard for me to memorize the lecture that my teacher gave that day, but whatever song Lauryn Hill was rapping, I could say it back from in word for word. And I think what I actually really loved about these rap songs in particular these were voices and stories that I didn't normally hear in other media. And as we all know in 2020, and we talk about, we see these words like representation and visibility thrown out. I just want to stress how important those things are, because when you see someone who looks and sounds like you or is very similar to your experiences, I think that also validates you as a person and makes you feel like you're seen and that you're heard. And that's what these artists did for me. And that's why I fell in love with hip hop. Thank you for that great question.
I think there's one more student question, Roger.
I think that might have been the one I accidentally took, but I'm not sure.
Do you have like a specific line in one of your poems or one of your raps that you like?
I do. I'm not sure how many writers there are here, but for me, ever since I started writing, every time I come up with like a line that I really like, I get super excited. I'm like, yes, this is the one. But then now that I've written so many things, I've been writing pretty much since I was 13 years old. Um, it's hard for me to kind of choose which one, but my favorite song that I have written is a song called Us. And why I love that song so much is because I got to collaborate with some of my favorite friends, and they're all women on the track, all girls. And for me, it has always been a dream of mine to collaborate on a song with just having all women's voices. As I mentioned earlier, when we talk about representation and the value in that, as a woman growing up, whether it was through literature or through music or through movies, I did realize that a lot of this were usually male dominated, especially within the space of hip hop. And so it has always been a goal of mine to amplify the voices of women. I love artists like Beyonce, Cardi B, like those. I think like those women who really represent, being proud and celebrating your womanhood and celebrating sisterhood. And that's what I wanted to accomplish with a song like Us, and being able to have that dream realized by creating that song and the music video, where we had over 100 girls in just one music video. That to me was very powerful. And at the end of the day was also, I think, a statement to show everyone that, look, when girls work together, it's not about competition. It's not about who's better than the other. It should be about collaboration. It should be about uplifting and celebrating one another.
These are great questions. Do we have more student questions? I'll go ahead and read one from the chat. The question is, what is your writing process and what helps you to feel confident in your writing?
My writing process really varies per poem or per song. When I was first starting out, when I used to write as a student, I would have to think of a topic first, and I would, write it from beginning to end. And I would really just force myself to finish a specific poem. I think for writers, a lot of the time, and we'll talk about this in my workshop later on, there's this thing called when you just have a mental block or you just lose inspiration. And for me, I try to find inspiration in everything that's around me, whether it's the experiences of my friends, my family, or my parents. And when it comes to writing my songs, I would say that most of the time I write them in fragments and bits and pieces. For example, I could be in the shower and I'll think of one line and then I'll just record that on my phone, or I could be driving and then I'll do the same thing. I think there really isn't, I wouldn't say that I would say that there isn't a, one fits all formula when it comes to writing. I think if you're a writer or a creative person, there's always going to be a different approach depending on how you feel and whether you're inspired at that given moment in time. And I think we just have to remember to be kind to ourselves and not to pressure ourselves when we're creating art. I think when I think of artists, I think of people who really give all of themselves and put themselves in a position of vulnerability. And that to me makes beautiful art, when you're being authentic and you're giving your 100% true self. And we can't force authenticity. We shouldn't pressure that. So I would say for the writers that are here today, just whenever you have a source of inspiration, write that down, make sure that's captured.
The next question is, do you do presentations at schools? It would be wonderful because you're a great role model.
Thank you so much. This is actually my very first school presentation. I've done spoken word workshops before, but it's very similar to what I'll be doing later this morning. But in terms of full presentations, this is my first one. So thank you for letting me be here today.
Maybe you can share your website address in case anybody wants to look up more information about you or want to contact you.
Oh, sure. So I'll be writing down my website in the chat right now, but I'll also say that my website is rubyibarra.com, but I'm also on platforms like Spotify, iTunes, and YouTube. And it's just my name. My first name is Ruby. My last name is Ibarra, Rubyibarra. And if we do have writers here, especially students that are interested in spoken word or even rapping, please feel free to reach out to me. I do read my messages, and I would love to, read or watch any of your poetry as well for people here that are also creatives.
We have a few more questions that got entered into the chat. At what age did you realize you were very creative? When you were in school or later on?
I think I realized that I was creative while I was in school. My first memory of poetry was when I was in the 5th grade. My teacher that year just really loved poems, and she made it actually a project for 3 months, the first 3 months of that school year, to read literature by Shel Silverstein, who is one of my favorite poets and one of the first poets that I ever read. And so we got into this poetry project, and we each were assigned to memorize a poem. And of course, me being the little overachiever that I was as a little kid, I went ahead and I think I memorized the longest poem that was in that book, which was like 4 pages. And after going through that project, I realized, like, wow, this is so powerful, not only to be able to present and say these words out loud, but to then be inspired to want to write my own poetry. I think that was very empowering for me. And I'm just very glad, looking back at that experience, that my teacher introduced us to poetry. So I definitely, I encourage everyone who aren't familiar with, art, poets like Shel Silverstein, or even things like Youth Speaks, which is a big organization here in the Bay Area. Please do check those things out. There's a lot of value in poetry and storytelling.
Do we have any other student questions or questions you would like to just unmute yourself and just interact directly with Ruby?
I wanted to ask something, if I may.
Sure.
Hi, Ruby. Thank you. I wanted to ask you your opinion about our current system of education. Do you think it allows for students to be creative, become creative, since we have no art, no music usually? So what is your opinion about that?
I would say for me as a kid, again, one of the most impactful things that I ever experienced was my teacher introducing that poetry unit in class. And also I did take music classes as a kid. I played violin, and those things, I think, as important as, learning about history, learning about science were, these classes that allowed me to think outside of the box and to allowed me to express myself and to think creatively were just as important. And I really like to hope that our educational system, especially here in the Bay Area, don't forget the value in music and the arts, especially nowadays. Again, like I mentioned earlier, the power and influence that music, especially hip hop, has on this young generation of kids. There's a lot of value in that, whether it is introducing a poetry unit or I've seen some teachers do this in the past, where they'll present an album that students may be familiar with, and they'll analyze that critically. I think it's important for us to remember that, especially in art like hip hop, there is a lot of educational value to it. These rappers are also poets and writers in their own right, and even things like literary devices are very much prevalent in a lot of the writings that they do. And I think what's even more important is a lot of these songs also talk on a lot of the social issues that I think students can relate to or students are aware of, especially in these times. And so I'd like to urge teachers, the teachers that are here today, to really, stress the importance and the value of the arts and make sure that we try to incorporate that in our classes.
Thank you.
Hi, Ruby. My name is Sofia Fojas. I'm actually the arts coordinator for the Santa Clara County Office of Education, just here on a Saturday helping out. I was happy to hear your words, and as the new arts coordinator, arts and culture has been a lens through which we see arts. And so to encourage not just arts in the public schools, the way they have been presented, but also partnerships with arts and culture organizations. So one of the things that's coming up for us is the Marion Silker Conference for Arts in Education, an arts integrated approach for non-arts teachers and pre-service education students. And many arts and culture organizations will be presenting. With one in particular, I love that you speak about hip hop and music, because it crosses so many content areas. And we have a presenter, Tyson Amir, from the Black Literary Collective, who will be presenting a workshop. So I invite people to come and attend. It's relatively inexpensive, really meant for the non-arts teacher. But thank you so much for speaking about the importance of arts, particularly now in this time, and just the impact that it has in your life. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And that's amazing to hear that you all are implementing that. I think that's going to add great value to the students.
Any other questions? A few more from the chat here. One person asked, since we have youth on here, I guess a Zoom call, what is your advice on how to survive this pandemic?
That's a great question. I think my main advice is really to check in with one another. I think during these times, it is really taxing for all of us, emotionally and also mentally. And oftentimes we forget how important taking care of our mental health is and practicing self-care. I know that we've all been impacted and affected in different capacities in more ways than one. So this is just a gentle reminder for everyone to check in with your friends and your family. I know people are, the CDC has advised social distancing. I'd like to see that more as physical distancing. We're very fortunate to be in a time where things like Zoom, FaceTime, and these platforms exist to allow us to still have these interactions. And we're human beings, so these human connections and relationships are natural and are things that are, should be part of our lives. And so let's not forget to continue to check in with one another and to keep continuing those connections and those relationships.
Okay, a few more questions. How long did it take you to get into the routine of shuffling around being a rapper and a COVID-19 researcher?
It's still taking me time right now, actually. So sometimes I find myself at work where I think my biggest challenge is time management, because having two careers is definitely very challenging. So sometimes during my break time or my lunchtime, I'll do an interview in the car, or I'll be practicing my lyrics with my headphones on while I'm pipetting in the lab. And so I think it's just a matter of learning how to balance these things. And for a lot of us, whether you're a student or you're a teacher, we all have multiple responsibilities and multiple roles that we carry out in our daily lives. I think, but we all know it's just a matter of balancing our time and managing our time.
Okay, thank you. A couple more questions. Did you see other women that looked like you in college?
I was fortunate that I was, so I went to UC Davis, and we had, aside from our, vast amount of Asian American studies courses and ethnic studies courses. We had a course that was available my last year there, which was Filipino American history. And the professor that was there was also a Filipina. So for me, it was very empowering to see a professor who did look like me. And again, the importance of having that representation, I think, is very important for the youth to see people not only who look like us in the media, but the people who are making decisions, whether it's politicians, whether it's the people writing these films or writing these songs, the people behind the scenes. I think all around, we just need to remember how important it is that there's diversity there, but also, of course, keeping in mind that the intent and making sure that we're here to tell the stories authentically.
Thank you, Ruby. And I think we have just one more question that was entered into the chat, and then we'll probably conclude after this one. Do you have any advice for youth on how to be confident in their art, poetry, music?
Thank you so much for that question. My advice is to be yourself, to never feel like if you want to be an artist, if you want to be a poet, if you want to be a rapper or musician, I think if you do what you love, other people will notice that and other people will gravitate towards that. For me, I never felt like I had to write a certain way or I had to speak about certain things. I just wrote about who I was and my experiences. And there were people that identified with that. And if you're a young creative writing about something that you're passionate in, something that you believe in, or something that's true to you, I think it's also important to realize that if you have experienced something, there's at least one other person who's experienced it as well. And for me, when I think about representation and visibility, ultimately that means having someone out there that can relate, having someone out there that can identify with your story. And just be yourself and be confident, and definitely know too that being an artist or a creative, it's not about the amount of views that we have or the popularity or the following. I know that we're in an era of social media where sometimes we're blindsided by how many people are following us on Instagram or how many people have seen our TikTok video. But we need to remember that it's not just about that. It's about having fun and being yourself.
Well, thank you, Ruby, so much for your insight and also your inspiration. We're going to definitely continue this with your workshop. So for those of you who signed up for Ruby's workshop, you'll have a lot more interaction with her on writing, spoken word. But for now, we are going to take a short break. This is the time where we'll be transitioning all of you from the keynote over to the workshop. So if you haven't had a chance to rename yourself in Zoom, please take a moment to do that, to identify which workshop that you'll be attending. And just pardon the short break, we'll be transitioning everybody over to your breakout rooms for the workshops. So just stay on with us. Thank you so much, and we'll just take a quick break. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the main room. I hope that you guys had a great time at your workshop. I just wanted to go ahead and conclude with a few remarks. First of all, that we really appreciate your feedback and anything that you would like to share with us about your workshop experience, your Zoom webinar experience, or any suggestions for future workshops. We would appreciate that. And a quick thank you to all of our support staff, including John Madriaga, who's been behind the scenes, directing everybody to their breakout rooms and managing any of the technical difficulties, and Olivia for just managing the parent engagement project. Big thank you to Claudia, who's my parent engagement specialist partner, and she's been interpreting in the background. And for all of our workshop presenters and keynote presenters, thank you so much. I just want to leave you with one thought. This is from an author. Vision is the potential to see, vision is the ability to see potential in what others overlook. And so I really hope that today, from the keynote and from the workshop, that you have gained a little bit to see potential in others, but more importantly, to see the potential in yourself as we navigate through these times of learning together. So thank you guys so much for coming, and I hope that our paths cross again one day. Thank you so much.